Hello, everyone. We are starting with the session. I, Divya Jain, on behalf of Indian Angel Network, welcome you all to yet another exciting session of Chai at IN, navigating the legal journey for startups. Chai at IN is a series of masterclasses to provide comprehensive insights to young entrepreneurs, early stage startups, and business enthusiasts. Most of our sessions are conducted by investors, successful entrepreneurs, covering various aspects of building a valuable business, ranging from validating business ideas to building brands, successful fundraising strategies, building teams and investor relationships, and more. Chai at IN is powered by AWS. AWS will reach out to you soon and they'll help you start in your venture. We'll share the link with you in the chat box. You can reach out to them as well. Today's Chai at IN session is backed by our ecosystem partners, Startup India and BioAngels. BioAngels is India's first sector-focused angel network, which is focusing on 6 sectors: biotech, health tech, medtech, pharma, clean tech, and agri-tech. You can explore more about BioAngels for investment and fundraising on www.bioangels.vc. The topic that we have for today is something which is very relevant and significant for startups. In today's session of navigating the legal journey for startups, we are looking at building a solid foundation for the startups. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our esteemed speaker for today, Ms. Shruti Dvivedi Sodhi from Khaitan Legal Associates. Shruti is a partner based in the Delhi office of Khaitan Legal Associates, a full-service law firm committed to forging a new era in the practice and service of law. She heads the Delhi office and leads the TMT startup and data protection practices for the firm. She's also a part of finance practice and regularly advises funds in their investment in the startup and TMT space. Her 26 years of experience as a lawyer is a culmination of working across various genres, including funds, startups, FMCG, BFSI, IT, telecommunications, private equity, and venture capital, general corporate, and compliance. Shruti also supports various initiatives, including the Government of India initiative of Startup India, and mentors state cohorts of Haryana, Uttarakhand, Chhattisgarh, and the Gujarat Student Startup and Innovation Hub. Welcome to Chai at IN, Shruti. We are excited to have you on our session today. So without further ado, I am handing over the session to you.
Thank you so much, Divya. And, just as I was about to be excited about talking to the young lot, you've given away my age by sharing my number of years of experience. So to all the young participants out there and attendees, first and foremost, thank you and welcome for sparing your time and making the time and listening in to what we have to share. But at the same time, I would want to caveat it by saying that, yes, I may be old, but I am very young at heart and very, very keen to learn from all the young startups, young startup entrepreneurs who keep me extremely active and busy and always allow me the opportunity of rolling up my sleeves and working at and tackling a new problem that they have at hand. So once again, welcome to the session. I hope you find it useful, and thank you, Divya, once again, and thank you, IN, for always creating a new space for people like me and people who we can contribute to, which are the young startups of the nation, get onto a common platform. Always a pleasure to being with you and IN.
Always a pleasure to host you, Shruti.
Thank you. Okay, so I do want to, and I want to make this, while I understand there'll be Q&A at the end of it, but I also want to make it an engaging session. Therefore, I want to have it a little bit of a Q&A as we begin. And what I would propose is that you could perhaps, post your questions in the chat or your answers, and they'll be very simple questions for me to ask as we begin. And the first and foremost simple question that I have for all of us to indulge in or delve into is, what does legal actually mean for young entrepreneurs like you? Not as we see it, supposedly experts in law, but as you see it, as entrepreneurs, what comes to your mind when you hear the word legal? Can some of you just throw in your answers in the chat box? Compliance, thank you, Varun. What else? Rail guards, legal compliance to all laws of the land, any commercial agreement terms, IPR, courts, all legal documentation, regulations, obligations. Got it. Thank you for actively answering my request. Okay, now my second question to that. How do these aspects of IPR, courts, legal documentations, regulations, obligations, legal boundaries occur for you in your listening? Now, that's how you define legal, but how do they occur for you? ये सब सोच के सुन के, do you feel very happy? Do you feel, oh yes, we have it all answered, and we can conquer them, it's no big deal? What do you feel? How do they occur to you? Can some of you again be gracious enough? Scary, I got that, Prashant. It's like the sky falling. Got it. Additional work. We have to abide, and therefore we seek professional help for that as we see it. Ever-changing, confusing, unclear. Got it. Fear of unknown. Thank you, Keshav. Thank you. Trade-off between writing off or litigation. Got it. Systematic approach to start a company. What if ED comes? Safeguarding against wrong investors. Perfect. Divya, we should actually collate all these answers and all these questions also. I definitely want them for my records.
Yeah.
No, thank you. So essentially, I can completely get that word. I had some of these thoughts in my space as well. Challenging, unknown, scary, unnecessary at times, why do we have to do it, burdensome, and stuff like that. So here's what I have to say to all of you. Perhaps that's how each one of us will react to any domain that is unknown to us. So supposing you're a very, very great, unique fintech startup or any startup, and before I were to assist you in that domain or journey, if I were to not know what that is, any field like that, for example, tech scares me because tech is unknown to me. I mean, I'm a layperson. I understand it from the perspective of what I need to kind of know from a legal perspective, but tech changes as of yesterday. I mean, today we will be talking about something and there'll be a new version of the same technology that's already making pathways around there. So anything that is unknown to us, any domain that is unfamiliar to us, each one of us will react in the same way that you would react to seeing it when we say the word legal. So supposing you knew the broad legal contours, would it not make it relatively easy for you to perhaps preempt and plan and just see, okay, this is something that we should be looking at, this is something we should be aware of, this is something we should be careful of, this is something we should be planning for. So this session essentially is a very simple attempt at initiating that journey for you, and perhaps leave you with some pertinent thoughts and questions to discern and ascertain where you are in your journey and what aspects of law and legal support should you keep in mind as you navigate your entrepreneurial journey. Does that make sense? I mean, some of you could type in a yes, and then we could proceed forward. So, great. Divya, we can now put up the slides as such. Now, the first slide, please. Yeah. Got it. Yeah, so this is all about navigating the legal journey of a startup. That's the first slide which Divya has helpfully moved forward from. So we've now on the slide called contours of legal support. Why have we at Khaitan Legal created this? We've chosen the word contours very, very specifically. The idea behind of that was largely that, you know, instead of leaving you with some, no, Divya, just be on this slide, please. Instead of leaving you with stock slides on legal, we have broadly divided the journey into 3 legal contours. Now think of the contours as 3 concentric circles. They may run parallel, they may run simultaneous, apart from the initial pieces of work that gets done in setting up. Largely, a lot of these domains and dimensions, contours, could run in parallel or sometimes, you know, stage-wise. So essentially, the reason why we call them contours is because you got to kind of keep an eye for different reasons at different times in each of these. So contour 1 being, you know, as you set up, as you get started, what you need to think and evaluate and get ready with. Contour 2, we give you a little flavor of the life cycle, and therefore what becomes key at that time is, in your growth stage and expansion stage, and perhaps at certain critical and strategic occasions in your journey. And then the contour 3 is essentially throughout a lifetime of an organization. It could be young, like yourselves, could be growth oriented or in the growth spaces or mid spaces, or it could be an old organization. So some of these things run through the system of your existence. If we could move to the next slide, please. First, let's look at what, according to our Indian, and now I'm jumping in a little bit of the legal spaces. Deepak saying there is a disturbance in voice. I don't know if it's only for me or everyone is facing the same. Divya, can you just check and I'll pause till then?
Your voice is very much clear to me. There's no disturbance.
Got it. So let's look at what, according to law, is a startup. Essentially, it could be a private limited company, a partnership firm, or an LLP. For 10 years from the date of its incorporation, but subject to the following conditions. Its turnover hasn't exceeded 100 crores for any of the financial years. Secondly, it is working towards innovation. It has a scalable business model, and it has a high potential of employment generation. So some of these very basic fundamentals must be covered. Now, why are they necessary? They are necessary for the simple reason because, sorry, the chats are disturbing me a little. If we can, somebody's advertising on the chat. Can we hold on to some of those information messages for the end, please? I'll appreciate that. Because otherwise I think it's a question and my mind goes to the question as I'm talking. Thank you so much. So some of these, while this is a fundamental definition emanating out of the DPIIT, space of the startups, essentially it's always good to know what would be considered a startup. And as you're creating your new idea or creating your new organization, you must know that these three aspects are key to having a great potential organization or a young organization that you're putting in place. We can move to the next slide, Divya. So one of the first fundamental questions that comes to your mind is, what should I create? What would be the most optimal and the best model of existence for my idea as such? Do I form a private limited company? Could I be a limited liability partnership? Or do I need to be a partnership firm? Now, while some of these answers could be dependent on where you are in your journey, what works for you, or to get started, and maybe over a period of time, you may look at starting off as something else and then converting it into a company. But largely, while there are onerous obligations of compliance, etc., that relatively onerous obligations of compliance, etc., that come onto a private limited company, but it's always a good structure to have for various reasons. As you grow, for example, one being, as you grow, funds and FDI, etc., could be more easily received if you were a company. So largely, the structure could be something that works for you, but that is a distinct advantage that a company or private limited company can have. Now, again, this is, as you ideate this, it's always good to, it's maybe not formal, but look at somebody who has some legal knowledge and expertise, who could help you understand and figure out which one would be most viable for you and your idea. So that's the first step of perhaps very small but informal legal support that you could look at. So friends and family or lawyers that you know through your network, you could jump out and say, hey, I'm thinking of this. What do you think is best for me? This is my way forward as such. Divya, we could move to the next slide. Now, again, I'm looking at all the contours of legal support. So depending on which structure you choose, some of these aspects of setting up an incorporation could be supported by or are easily supported by lawyers, and could be a useful area to take your legal support on. So if you're wanting to incorporate your company and write your charter documents, etc., while the incorporation, etc., is very easily done through the web links available at the MCA portal, but there could be support required for creating your charter documents. When I say the word charter documents, I mean your memorandum of association, your articles of association, and things like that. With the limited liability partnership, there could be a deed that you need to have, and also with the partnership firm. So some of these aspects of documentation and incorporation, registration are things that could be supported by friends, family, and lawyers who could be lawyers, or legal support that could be available to you as you move this along. Divya, could we move to the next slide? Now, the minute you get registered or you get incorporated, and now I'm specifically, some of these are now specifically relating to a private limited company, because largely that's where larger compliances and requirements of registrations arrive. So this now moves into that care. So the minute you get incorporated, these are some of the licenses and registrations you must absolutely have to make yourself operational. So if, as a company, if you have employed, you need to have a shops and establishment registration. If you will need a central goods and service tax or GST registration if your turnover exceeds 20 lakhs. You will need a PAN and a TAN, a permanent account number for the company. There's also a tax deduction account number for the company. If you are, it may not be relevant immediately, and but the minute you grow in size and you become 20 or more people, you will need to have a PF registration. In case you are a factory or carrying out manufacturing activities and you have 10 or more people, you will need an employee state insurance registration and then therefore compliance. And if you are 10 or more people, you will need a gratuity, payment of gratuity act license and registration as well. So some of these, while, just 1 second, Divya, while they come in at inception, there would be a frequency of either renewal or filings in relation to that or actions in relation to that that could also form part of contour 3 if you go recall the first slide of the 3 contours. So these are minimum needed to get started, but there is a recurring phenomenon that comes in with each of these registrations and licenses. Thank you, Divya. We can move to the next slide. Okay, so let's now delve into the complex, extremely confusing and scary world of startup, of legal, that a startup needs to navigate through. Now, the reason why I've put all the boxes here is because the bad news is that there are all these boxes here, but the good news is that that's perhaps the entire amount of boxes you need. So if we decode each one of these to some extent, you will know what about them you need to be careful, aware of, and how could you possibly at least think where support or seeking support is required. So when I was young, one of the things that one of my professors told me when we were studying law is that, what you study and what you apply are two very different things. As long as when you start applying them, you know where to find what answer or where to look for, and you identify the right legal provisions, you're sorted. So this is my little attempt at giving you that tool. Now, you may not know everything about these pieces, but at least if I were to decode some, what this entails, then perhaps the minute you're crossing that path in your journey, entrepreneurial journey as a startup, you'll say, hey, maybe a good idea to just check up on this with some legal experts. And depending on the seriousness of it, of your thought and seriousness in terms of progressing with it, etc., you could then consider how to kind of seek legal support on it. So I'll start with the right column. It's perhaps the most recent. Let's look at data privacy. It's essentially about, and largely I'm assuming a lot of startups are tech enabled. And therefore, it's about what information and data are you consuming, what are you using it for, what services that you provide, or what technology that you develop is dependent on that. And therefore, currently with the IT legislation, the IT Act and the legislations under it and the regulations under it, and very soon when we have our own data privacy law available to us, a lot of these aspects of content and data will get regulated, and you will need to comply with them. This will be very, very specifically critical for D2C businesses, because there you are consuming a lot of personal data and financial data of individuals, which could be sensitive and which will require consent as we move along. Intellectual property rights. Intellectual property rights, largely, there are three things that a startup relies upon: the idea and the uniqueness of innovation, etc., that they're looking at, the founders and their skill sets and what they bring to the table. And both of these things culminate into the intellectual property of the organization. And therefore, it becomes critical both from a value creation and a value retention perspective. How do you look after it? How do you protect it and keep it safe from any misuse? The other aspect of it is, if you are relying on other aspects of that already exist there, it's also a good idea to see if you're not infringing anybody else's IP, because that can also land into some trouble. Human resource, largely a young startup, it's very critical as you're growing or as you start out to expand, to hire and retain good talent. So one thing is, how do you kind of create a structure and a framework for their association with you, their engagement with you, and their ongoing working with you. So be it their employment letters, be it the policies that the organization creates, all of that needs to be created in a manner. And again, legal support as you navigate through this is good and is advisable to kind of at least have the basic framework be created with that support. Corporate governance. Now, corporate governance, I can't belabor enough. Again, it may start young, but it's the most key thing for any level of organization. And in your cases, corporate governance really comes in handy for finding and attracting good investors and retaining their trust, because this is all about keeping your the way you run the company, what policies do you have, and everything being very transparent and accountable, and obviously therefore showcasing the health of the company, so to speak, very, very simply put. Statutory and annual compliances, these are again part of the contour 3 of the legal concentric circles that we spoke about. These are they could be occasion based and they could be annual, like the word says. These could be related to transactions, fundraising, for example, and these could be also dependent on what you must do on an annual basis or as a running organization, so to speak. Again, the fun words here: investments, financing, and borrowing. Obviously, a young startup always needs funds and people to buy into their idea and their journey, and therefore this attracts a lot of work in terms of valuations, like transaction documents, due diligences, and all of that. So that becomes a very, very heavy area of support. Again, they could be for whatever reasons, the reasons and the fundraise should match with each other. So therefore that again becomes a key area for legal support. Material contracts, these could be of various natures. These could be, if you're a service providing company, it could be with your key customers. So service provisioning contracts, these could be joint venture agreements. I mean, they could be for any strategic requirement of the organization. It could be with your key vendors if you rely heavily on some outsourced vendors to be able to provide your own service. So they could be in the domain of service procuring contracts. But largely, the world revolves around these spaces of legal support, so to speak. Can we move to the next slide, Divya? Now, before we got into the contour 2 and contour 3, it's important to understand the life cycle of a startup. So it's obviously I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys know this better than I do. But again, your journey starts with your ideation. Obviously, it progresses well towards validation. You have your prototype ready. You have angel investors, etc., as the source of funds that you could look at. And then early traction is where venture capital comes in, and you have a product or a service launched in the market. You are looking at creating your app, and app downloads are happening and stuff like that. And then there is scaling. Then you kind of get running. There is more revenue generation, and that's when bigger entities look at investing in you and get interested in you. And then all of this ultimately could result in an exit. Exits could be in various forms. Could be an M&A, it could be an IPO, it could be a buyback. I mean, it could be anything whereby investors then get the value for their money of having invested in you. So while this looks at funds and what an activity, but largely each of these stages is from validation to exit, I would say. Some of these aspects are critical in your journey, and it's best to have some sensible legal advice depending on the nature and the criticality and the size of the activity involved to seek some legal support. And that's why I thought I will put this up there before we kind of move on. Divya, we can move to the next slide. Now, one of the fundamental things in the life cycle of a startup was essentially fundraise. And therefore, I thought I'll bring out the key aspects of a fundraise transaction that are legal in nature and that are best supported by legal advice. So you start off with a term sheet. And in the term sheet, once finalized and executed, you then do definitive documentation. Now, that's a very legal word there, except that it just means two specific kinds of documents that you need to sign or negotiate and execute. One is the share subscription agreement, by which you are allotting equity in your company to the prospective investors. And therefore, once they become shareholders in your company, you will need a shareholders agreement. And therefore, give them some rights and in your organization for as negotiated. Now, remember, everything can be negotiated, but obviously there are certain set terms that we need to kind of be aware of and then move forward on those bases. Once the documentation is complete, what follows is a lot of compliances and filing for issuance and allotment of the shares. Then you have to do the issuance of share certificates. And then there is a board meeting and the requirement for appointment of directors and all the filings that need to happen on the basis of that. Now, if there are other specific areas of negotiation and agreements, for example, ESOP, etc., then those will require separate specific filings and compliances in relation to that. I thought I'll bring out the whole legal support structure if you from a fundraise perspective, because that is a key area of legal support that a startup requires. So this could be again part of Contour 2, but now every time you're looking at legal support, fundraise, then it could, you could be having Contour 3 running as for ongoing legal support and compliances, and this could then again come in. So Contour 2 and Contour 3 could come up. Contour 3 runs forever, but Contour 2 could come in at any stage. And Contour 1 could also come in if you were looking at expanding and forming new organizations as you move along. Divya, we can move to the next slide. Yes, like I said, I can't belabor this enough, that corporate governance is something all the fundraise due diligences look into. One, they look into the basic health of the company. Are all your compliances, annual compliances are in order or not? But however young or small you may be, do you have an infrastructure or, and it's not about a lot of heavy documentation, mind you. It's just the basic principles on which you have set up your organization and company. And all of this then weigh into how you kind of have your organization perceived. How have you managed your risks? Is there enough transparency in the in the way you are engaging with your investors or talking to them with all the data and information that they need? Have you used your funds or funds to date, be it your own, if you're bootstrapped, or the seed and angel rounds? Have you used the funds in the appropriate manner or not? So things like that kind of then have a huge bearing on how you would be perceived as an organization. We can move to the next slide. Yes, like I said earlier, this is all about your intellectual property, a key aspect of your innovation, ideation, and value creation as a startup. Depends on intellectual property that you have in the organization. It's very important that you have the ownership of the intellectual property that you've created. You at least start looking at what does it qualify under. Is it your trademark and logo as an organization name, etc. If it's an idea or a unique innovation that you're working towards, the copyright for the process that you have, and then the patents, etc. If there is a technology patent that you think you have brought forth. So, and the registration, if it's yours, you want to protect it with the registration of it, be it at a domestic or a global level. And if you are using some other intellectual property, like I said before, make sure that you have the relevant licenses for those. We can move to the next slide. Now this comes into what you need as ongoing and annual legal support for compliance. There is a lot of compliances that you need to do annually, for financial statement filing, etc., for any director appointments, etc. So those need to be done. You need to maintain as a company statutory registers that again come in very handy for showcasing your corporate governance and compliance health. They may seem unnecessary if you're a small organization, but it's always a good idea to have them be there and create them. They come in handy for building investor confidence and having the diligence processes be running smooth. As a company, you do need to have board meetings, general meetings, an annual general meeting, and you do some extraordinary general meetings where the need to arise. Therefore there is a bunch of resolutions that they need to get passed. They could be of different natures. So again, these are aspects. It's best to have a lawyer advise you as to is the action big enough for you to have a critical enough or significant enough for a board resolution, and then what kind of a resolution does it need. As an organization of a critical size, you will need to have and you will need to have under your employment and human resource section a POSH policy that also requires annual return filing if you are a company of a critical size. I forget if it's 10 or 20, but yeah, it's relatively critical to have this as an organization. And then inside of these corporate compliances, whether annual or ongoing, you also have the other aspect of it, which is as you grow, as you expand, as you set up, there are aspects where you may just need somebody to answer a few questions for you for critical decisions that you are taking as part of your entrepreneurial journey as a startup. So that could be strategic advisory, like I say on the right side of the column. Again, employment and labor is something that you will need to keep in mind. Contracts, and then as I remember some of the earlier question answers that I received, dispute resolution. okay, is this is going into dispute? Can I attempt to avoid it? What do I need to do if this blows into a full-fledged dispute? How do I address it? Did I see it coming? Maybe at that time only we can look at getting some legal support and advice. But if I can't, then how do I kind of navigate my way through this? And how can I get the right advice to navigate my way through this? So those are the basic things about ongoing and annual legal support. This largely forms the contour 3, and you have to have somebody, or at least have the awareness of knowing when do you need to reach out and seek legal support on this. So yeah, I think we're at the end of our conversation on these, and Divya, I hope we do have time for questions. Maybe we can then take them now.
Thank you so much, Shruti, for such an engaging and interesting session. I'm sure our attendees have learned a lot from you. Moving on to Q&A. So actually, we have a lot of questions. The first one is from Varun Bhagat. If my co-founder cannot join me full-time, is it imperative to still have a founder agreement in place?
Absolutely. It's even more imperative that you have a founder agreement in place, because I'm sure the rights, duties, liabilities, and shares, I mean, and the stake interest would be commensurate with the time that he's perhaps providing to you. And you would want that to be very, very specifically recorded in your understanding with them. Again, it may not be a very fancy, full-fledged, very robust legal document, but it is very, very important that your intent is captured very well.
Next one is from Harsh Sethi. Is it also the definition requirement for recognition under Startup India program?
Yes, it is. It is exactly that definition. And I put it there deliberately because, if any of you are looking at any DPIIT registrations under the Startup India program, then that is absolutely what they look at, the criterion that they look at.
Okay. Next that we have is from Mohit Sapra. Could you share pros and cons of one-man company as an alternate to private limited?
OPC will be a very limited structure. You will need to, you will only have a particular level of capital that you can have in an OPC. The minute you cross that threshold, you will need to incorporate a company or convert that into a company. Nowadays, the authorized capital requirements are very, very minimal for a private limited company as well. So maybe if you have, again, scalability being one of the key aspects, maybe a good idea to just start off with a full-fledged company as opposed to then transferring it and making it separately.
Okay. Next is from Varun Bhagat. Can angel investors and VCs invest in LLPs?
They can invest, investments, all three are qualified startups.
Yeah.
So they usually prefer a more corporate governance structure, and therefore they prefer companies, but nothing stops them from investing in LLPs. They can absolutely invest in LLPs as well. Sweetie, am I right? Would you like to chip in into this answer?
Yes, absolutely.
And there is FDI also allowed under the automatic route in LLPs, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, I'm also checking with my soldiers who keep me honest on all the startup things.
I'll just pitch in here. Basically, depending on the sector that the investment is being taken in, it'll depend on whether it's an automatic route or government route. But yes, investments in LLP is absolutely doable.
Thank you, Aditi. I thought that was Arushi, and therefore.
No
So
problem.
so Divya, like I said, Aditi, Arushi, and Sweetie are my soldiers in the startup world, and they keep me honest on all of this. So I will also, now that you've said that I'm old, I would want to rely on them.
You come with a huge experience, and which is like very good. And never mention that you are old.
I'm just pulling your leg as well.
Okay. So next question we have is from Gauri L. So is the Shops and Establishments Act registration compulsory even if there is no physical customer facing office?
You need to have, if you are a company, you will need the shops and establishment registration, to my understanding.
Okay.
Aditi?
Yes, you will need the shops and establishment depending on the number of employees you have and the state that you operate in. You would require a shops and establishment.
Thank you.
I think another question we have from Varun Bhagat in continuation to shops and establishments registration is shops and establishments registration is needed even if I operate from my own house. Yeah.
Yeah, so same thing. So number of people in the state.
Yeah, and as long as you qualify with the definition of establishment under the Act, the regulation and the rules will be applicable to you.
Okay. Do investors have voting rights, or we can have investors without voting rights?
It depends on how you negotiate. If you negotiate, ideally they will want, every shareholder will want commensurate rights to their shares. So if they are a shareholder, yes.
Do legal firms also double up with corporate secretary services?
Yes, as a firm at Khaitan Legal Associates, we do support all corporate secretarial compliances. And while we are not qualified company secretaries, so for the certificate, the filing, etc., we do have somebody else signing up for us, but all advisory and all support in putting all of the forms and compliances and information together, we absolutely support all of it. And Divya, you could perhaps vouch for it, given we do that for IAN all the time.
Yes. We actually have a long partnership with Khaitan. Next question is from Hutesh Gautam. May I know who's the real owner of patents, applicant or inventor?
That's a technical question. I will go back to my IP team and get you a more clear answer on that. I'm not the IP expert here, I must confess. And depends on how, but the only limited answer I can give at the moment is that clearly how you filed it in the application and what then gets approved. Yes, the inventor absolutely has, credit to be given to it. But if it's if it's done under the auspices of an organization, then I'm sure there is a lot of value that goes to the organization of the invention or the patent. So essentially, that's a negotiation between the owner and the inventor and the owner.
Absolutely.
But and it obviously becomes a negotiated position as such. But if there is any further nuances to it, please write into us and we will give you a more detailed answer on it. Or write into Divya and IAN and we'll help facilitate that answer from them.
Sure. So next question we have is from Raghu Sripada. Are digital copies of NDA sent by email valid legally, or is it necessary to register them?
Under Indian law, currently digital signatures are not, the way we look at enforceability or validity is, are they validly acceptable in court were a dispute to arise? So that aspect still remains ambiguous. So as good practice, we do recommend that any critical document while it could be digitally signed for facilitation purposes, it's always good to have vetting signatures on critical documents and kept physical copies of, from a legal enforceability perspective.
Okay. If I am incorporating a private limited company, then can one of the founders be a foreign country person? This is from Amit.
Say a little more about that question.
Sorry?
I didn't quite understand the question. Can the person
If somebody is incorporating a private limited company, so he's basically asking if one of the founder could be a foreign, other nationality
Yes,
person.
They can be a
yes, you
director.
can, but you'll need 2 Indian directors from an incorporation perspective, I think, Aditi, right?
Yeah, so one of the directors can be a foreign director. That's not a problem.
Got it. Thank you for keeping me honest on this one, Aditi.
Can you please outline a few clauses that would be needed in a co-founder agreement, especially if at part-time capacity, whose representative holds equity on their behalf?
So Divya, this can perhaps come in as a request and we could then take it, because this will be a very detailed answer. That we need.
You can write to us and we'll facilitate this and we'll get your query resolved.
Yeah, just to add, Divya, here, basically, it's very important when there is a founder inter se agreement, it's very important that the rights and obligations of each of the founders is very categorically outlined in each of the agreements. So, that's very important as to what, rights and obligations and the duties each of the founders need to follow in taking the startup to the level that they think it should lead to. So, from that perspective, I think rights and obligations is something, and the duties that they are supposed to follow is very critical in a founders inter se founders agreement.
Thanks again.
Yeah, I think Gauri, you got some part of your answer. How to get the guidance and support to get the mandatory licenses and registrations like PF Act 1952 and Gratuity Act, etc.
So there are labor law consultants who do this. And Aditi, you unmuted yourself. Would you want to chip in?
Yeah, so essentially, yeah, we have labor law compliances, and when you reach a particular number of employees in your organization, you need to get an EPF registration, which is mandatory under labor laws, and it's essentially a form that you need to file under the EPF Act, and you can engage with a labor law consultant or any law firm which could help you in doing that. And given that it has serious repercussions, it's recommended that EPF registrations, once applicable, be taken.
Okay. Next question is from Hitesh Kumar. I register my company as private limited and we are doing our work from home, and registered address is also home address as we need laptops to work. Okay. And any other work done at customer side. So we. Okay.
This
so
is
he's
as we've
basically
answered
asking,
earlier.
yeah.
Depending
and established, yeah.
You will need the registration.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. Is it advisable to form a partnership till validation stage so that our energies are utilized for business success and thereafter go in for private limited?
Absolutely, it's your choice. Again, you may want to kind of see, just think through with someone who you think would be able to give you a more legally sound answer. If it's going to be converted very quickly, if the idea is so potent that you have your expansion and scalability is big enough, and you will, for 2 reasons, that you will become big very quickly, and also that you may need funds, then starting off as a partnership firm and then converting it into a company is also possible, except that if you can avoid that stage, depending on how where you are in your journey, then you may want to do that. So again, it's a call. you can start any which way you like.
Great, that's great. So due to the paucity of time, we'll be taking last two questions. One is from Gautam Dandekar. What safeguards should small startups take in agreements with VC funds? As we are small, we are vulnerable.
Aditi, over to you. Aditi?
Aditi, you are on mute here.
Can you repeat the question again? I think Aditi did a rain check on me.
Okay, so what safeguards should small startups take in agreements with VC funds? As we are small, we are vulnerable.
I think the short answer to that is that, you know, while they will want a safeguard of their investments and funds into you, given they are investing in you and your idea and and in you, you may want to give them, you may not want to resist anything that protects them and their investment, but at the same time, you may want to request them to keep your flexibility and being able to run with the idea and expand and grow. You know, free of any boundaries or bindings from them. Now, which would mean that you decide what's critical, what thresholds do they want for approvals, etc. How do you keep your how transparent do you keep your communication with them that trust grows? So very simple answers to those, to that question. Sorry, I didn't get the name of the question, the person who asked the question.
I think I missed it too. Gautam Dandekar, I guess. Okay. So one last question from Kush Chauhan. I just gave 5% equity to the marketing team. Can I do vesting with them?
That sounds like an ESOP. Make sure you have an ESOP policy and all the bells and whistles that come with an ESOP policy, your grant letter, exercise, what you need to do with that. You can accelerate vesting and you want to vest it in them. Absolutely. Yeah, so there is a mandatory 1-year period, I think. Yeah, Aditi.
Yes, I'll just add to that. There's a mandatory 1-year vesting period under applicable law. From the grant date to the vesting date, there has to be a minimum gap of 1 year. So that needs to be complied under applicable law.
Okay. So I hope we were able to cover the majority of the questions asked in today's session. I'm sorry, this session was from till 6:30, so we'll have to wind up now. But you can always write to us. I have shared my email ID, and we'll of course facilitate the questions, and we'll get your queries answered. So with this, we come to the end of our Chai Time session. Thank you, Shruti, Aditi, Sweetie, Arushi. Thank you to the entire Khaitan team for taking out the time to share these insights. I mean, I hope our attendees got a lot of takeaways from this session and everybody could learn from this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Divya. It's always a pleasure. And thank you everyone for participating fully. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Divya. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.